America's backbone was built on blue-collar business grit, grind, and muscle. This is where you stop working for the business, and the business starts working for you.
You've got to get the math right for your blue-collar business. Kevin, when you get an invoice paid, where does the money go?
You got to have buckets for everywhere that money's going. Chris and I talk about this. I found out he does the same thing I do. We break it into 100 points, 100 percentage. And you got to know where everything, all your expenses are going, basically by the percent thing. And we're going to talk about what we do and then how you can back into your own numbers. You have to know your numbers. Too many guys say, I'm not good at numbers. I hate that answer. You need to get good at numbers. If you want to be a multimillionaire, I don't know any deck of millionaires, multimillionaires who don't like numbers.
No. Well, the reality is you're psyching yourself out if you say that you don't like numbers, because the numbers really are simple. It's elementary math. This is not specialized math that you're doing. It's addition, it's subtraction, and it's multiplication and division. If you can do those four things, you can tackle this. And I know everybody that's listening, if you've made it this far in the world and into a career path, you know how to do those four types of arithmetic. So tell me when you've got an invoice that gets paid, how are you looking at the individual pieces concerning that? Let's take the $1,000, okay? So we got a $1,000 invoice that just got paid. How would you break down that $1,000 so that we can give a better understanding of what some of these terms as a business owner you should know, like gross profit, net profit, and
okay.
Such?
Well, I have a quick Excel spreadsheet, and I have an overview of every one of my expenses in buckets, so not super specific on things, and then what percentage they should represent of every invoice that goes out. So I use subcontractor stuff. That is just under 53%. Okay. My overhead is super low because I'm using subcontractors, because I'm using VAs and stuff.
Have a brick and mortar?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So your business
virtual.
model.
So yeah, if you have a brick and mortar, you have a building, you have to turn the lights on, you have utilities,
Yep.
You have insurance that's pretty much standard. Yes, workers' comp and general liability, you can get audited, it can go up. But you have an idea of like, hey, my insurance for my vehicles and everything is going to be $31,000. For every $1 million, you can just break that in. That's 3.1% of your money is going towards insurance.
Right.
So I break down everything, and then I can figure out back into where I need to get the profit to. The truth is, if most people did this, they'd find their profits way lower than they actually thought it was.
Yep.
And it's good to see these numbers, because then you say, all right, what am I overpaying on? If you're overpaying on labor or different things like that, then you have to figure out how to structure that. But a lot of times what you find out is you're overpaying for stuff that's much easier to solve. You could be spending too much money on driving too far to jobs. You could be spending too much money on your lease, wherever you're building. Maybe it's too big. You could be spending too much money on employee lunches and dinners and uniforms and a lot of stuff that's more controllable. You got to get those numbers under control.
Yeah. So if I had a $1,000 invoice paid, then you're going to find your gross profit, which is pretty much your direct job cost deducted from your total invoice number. So $1,000, and let's say that my cost of goods sold. As a service-based business, most of the time your cost of goods sold is going to be primarily labor. Depending on what industry you're in, you might have a higher material like consumable good cost on each job. So I'm going to deduct that direct cost on just that one job. If only that job eats it up, not if it gets ate up across multiple jobs, but if it's ate up on that one particular job, to me, that is my cost of goods sold. So that gets deducted from my total revenue. Now I know what my gross profit is. Your gross profit, you really want that thing to be between 70 and 80% or higher. Because if it's not, you're going to find that you have a really skinny profit margin at the very end by the time you start deducting. After you got your gross profit, then you've got your overhead. just like Kevin was talking, the brick and mortar or the virtual assistants, those are going to be the overhead types. Some more of your overhead, good way to think about it is what it just takes to keep the lights on. So fuel, your truck payment, your admin cost and inside the office that are not directly on the job site, all that's overhead. Deduct the overhead from your gross profit. There you go. There's your net profit. That's what you're looking at. That's what you're able to take to the bank at the end of the day. And that's what we're all fighting for in business. But you need to understand what a gross profit is, what an overhead is, and what a net profit is, because that total invoice is not what you're keeping. It's impossible. You've got cost on every single job, whether you realize it or not. And if you don't know your numbers, you're going to find out that you're not profitable at the end of the year. And you're going to think, man, I just worked my butt off. But where's the money at?
The overhead is super important to know that number. That's your set costs that don't really change. So basically, if it rains or it snows or whatever, that you're still paying those
That's
costs.
it.
That doesn't
Exactly.
change. So it's not a job where you're going out and you're buying shingles for a job, because that if you don't do the job, you don't have to buy the shingles if you're a roofer. But what I like to do is, this is what I did back in the day with landscaping. Let's say there's 250 days of work a year. That's 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. But if you're a landscaper in New Jersey, there is not 250 days. There's more like 200, because there's actually more like 180. So then I would figure out my overhead. What's my overhead just for total? And let's say that was 200 grand. I'm going to divide that by 180. How many days that my business is actually going to work?
Yeah.
And what would that be? That's like $1,100 a day, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't that high, anywhere near that. But you need to know that number, because every day you come into work, you got to go get that $1,100 or $400 just to get break even. But you could also put in salaries in there to, basic your office help or to you. So you need to know what that number is, because you got to get to that number and you want to drive that number down. And what people will find is they spend a lot of money on shit they don't need. You got to get that number down.
I think you brought up a really good point right there. You need to know your numbers, because you know what you've got to achieve each day. I watched this video clip from a life coach at an event that I went to one time, and it was a bunch of high school football players, and they were, I don't remember what the term is, but anyway, it's when you're bent over on your the balls of your foot and your hands, and you're having to pretty much bear crawl it down the field. And they had stuck like one of the water boys on the back of the linemen's backs, and they were crawling down through the field, and they were doing some of those exercises. Well, they went back to the huddle, and they were like, "Are we going to beat so and so school this Friday?" And you could tell just none of them really believed that they were going to beat the school. And then they ended up. He called one of the linemen out. He put the blindfold on him, and he said, "Listen, I want you to hit 50 yards because I know you can hit 50 yards." So the water boy hops on the back of this lineman. The lineman starts calling the coaches right in his ear. Come on, Taylor. Come on, Taylor. You could do this, Taylor." So he passes the 50-yard, and the coach never said anything. And the lineman's still moving, and he hits about 60 yards, and you can tell he's getting really fatigued. But the coach is just telling him, just a few more yards, just a few more yards. And it really made me think about in business, if we don't have a number, it's hard for us to know where we're trying to go. And most of us will quit because we don't have the coach yelling in our ear just a few more yards. But if we know we've got to hit the 50-yard line in this example, then we're going to push our energy until we hit the 50-yard line. So this goes kind of back to goal setting and whatnot, but you need to set a target. So knowing what your numbers are so that you can set a revenue target for each day, because that's digestible. A daily target is digestible. A yearly target will feel overwhelming. A monthly target, still too big. A weekly target, maybe. But if you can break it into a daily and say, hey, if we do $10,000 a day, then we're going to make this a week, this a month, this a year. Now your whole team can get behind you, but you need to know what your numbers are. So getting back to the point on it, how much you think we should spend on marketing? Let's kind of go through those expense numbers percentage-wise. What would you say, Kevin?
We like to market, we like to grow businesses. So probably on the high end to be 20%.
Yeah.
If you're really good at finding different ways to market, like by email, which I do, you can drive that number. My number is way, way, way below 20%.
Yeah, you're aggressive. You're very aggressive in your growth, which means you've already got your onboarding and training and your recruiting pipeline dialed in. If you're doing 20%, otherwise you really need to relook at it, and you need to stay on top of it if you're hitting 20%. But I agree, 20% is a very healthy, aggressive marketing budget, but it's on the high end, and there's definitely ways to do it cheaper. What about staff? Now I know yours are subcontractors. My field staff, they're costing me roughly about 20% the way I've structured them, because I wanted to be top of the market in the way I pay. And then my admin staff, they're close to 25% with my management and everyone that's sitting in the office.
I think that you have to be 25% or less. And one way to do that is, if you want to be at 20%, whatever you're paying that guy, he's got to be producing 5 times that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're paying somebody $100,
like
$150 a day, they need to be producing $750.
Yeah.
I have gutter guys, they all produce over $1,000 a day.
Yeah. So you're talking about the direct field technician, but quantifying what the lady that answers the phone, the operations manager or the warehouse technician, the estimator, all of those, that's really where it can get a little dicey and trying to understand. So what I've done is, if they're not directly physically doing the work on the invoice that I'm getting the invoice for, then I'm saying I can pay 25% in total of everybody that's not touching the actual work, so that I can invoice at the end of the job. And I have to figure out, okay, I have to look at all those tasks. I have to see the client's journey and say, okay, someone's answering the call, someone's quoting, someone's filing the paperwork, someone's doing the billing, someone's making sure we're paying our bills. Like all of that stuff, you got to look at all those tasks, and then you got to say, how much can one person take on, and how much is it going to cost me to get an A player to come in and take over that role?
This is so important. Breaking down all the jobs you're going to need, what percentage is that going to cost you, and then making a number on that. Even if you're a solopreneur, you should be doing this, because at some point you're going to have to hire this out. And that's a big mistake people make. They say, oh, well, I go do this job for $200. It's like 190 profit. It's 10 gas. No, it is not.
No, it's not.
It's way less than that. And you might be doing the work and doing the invoicing, everything, and you feel like you're making 50% on that. But when you start hiring people, it's going to drop down to 25%. So make sure that you're still going, when you hire other people, you're going to have room to pay everybody and still make a healthy profit. Big mistake people make.
Here's what I'll do. I'll sit there and I'll think through my head from start to finish. So how did I get the phone to ring? Okay, what type of marketing did I do to do that? Who's answering that phone when it rings? Who's doing the scheduling and the quoting over the phone, or who's going out in person to do the on-site quote? Who's doing the dispatching for my team? Who's actually performing the work? Who's making sure inventory is there for the team that's going out to perform the work? Who's doing the repair and maintenance? All these things, I go down and I jot down all these line items, and now I can create a customer journey from start to finish, because you got to have inventory before a truck can roll out and perform a job. You got to have repair and maintenance when something breaks, so that would be behind the job portion of it. And if you can get kind of a timeline set up, then you can really have a great foundation to start trying to allocate how many people you need and how much money it's going to take to provide to that person, so that you can get the correct person in the correct seat. Because you don't want to do what me and Kevin did and hire the cheapest person on the street, because now you're going to micromanage so much, you'll hate your job and you'll burn out. You want to find someone that's capable of doing it. And if you find that person, they're going to expect to pay to back up the value.
And, Chris and I are going over this on a broad overview. We're going to do this in 16, 18 minutes. But this is going to be in our boardroom course. We're going to break it down step by step and really help you guys do it. So don't feel like you got to figure it all out over here, because you also have to factor in jobs you don't get when you send estimators out there and they don't get them. or callbacks when you have to go in there. So when I price the gutter complexes, we know that 1 out of every 47 complexes, we have to go back.
Yeah.
And we have to spend probably $200 to the tech or whatever to go in there. So then I divide the 200 by 47. And I know, hey, it's going to cost me an extra, whatever, $5 a job, which is almost nothing. But I actually literally factor that into my cost. But I make it a little higher. I make it like $12 more, because they're also calling our staff, and we got to schedule it with the tech and everything. So it's like an $8 cost per job to us. That's how in the numbers I get.
So let's move on and let's talk about how are they going to find out where their money's being spent.
Okay.
So what are the two sources that they can look at to see where their money's been going? Because this up here at the top of our head, this brain, it's not going to remember where your money's being spent. But if you can look back at a resource, you'll know for sure.
This is what you do. You go into your bank statements and credit cards if you use both. If you just use one or the other, pull it in from an Excel spreadsheet so you can move it around. Then I'm going to get all the expense. Maybe you want to look over a 1 year average. I mean, this is all in QuickBooks too, but this is a way to do it. And then you put all the insurance costs together, all the gas costs, all the everything you use,
repair,
all the uniform costs, entertainment costs. Are you buying people and taking them to Fridays at the end? And then you can look at all the costs. You spent $1 million. What percentage was each category? That's the quickest and most accurate way to do it. Of course, you could get an accountant to help you with that. You could do these things, but somebody could do that in a couple hours on a Saturday.
Yeah. I mean, the accountant can do it, but you can find a high school student that says they're good at math if you're struggling with this.
Get a virtual assistant, easy to do.
Or a virtual assistant, I like it even better. Yep. Say, hey, here's my bank statement of expenses. Can you break these down into percentages? And here's the buckets I want you to put them into. Kevin, I would take, when I first started, first of all, if you're not using one source, make sure you're spending out of one source. So it either needs to be a credit card or a debit card. If you want to do both, I'm fine with that. But don't get over the two sources, because you need two statements max to look at. And I would take it and I would know my buckets: fuel, job supplies, utilities, loans and rent. And then I would look at uniforms, meals and entertainment. While I'm out on the job, I would pick it up because I would leave a card or something, so it would be a write-off. So I was talking business to the waitress or waiter, and I would literally sit there and highlight them in colors. And then down at the bottom, I would tally them all up. I didn't even stick it in a spreadsheet. I mean, it doesn't matter. You can get as manual as you need to, or you can use CRM systems, which is what we recommend, because it's going to be less labor involved. But if you don't know your numbers, how in the world are you making decisions on your growth?
Exactly. You can't do it. You have to have a VA, have somebody, if you're not going to do it yourself, go through your statements, put them into buckets. It'll give you a broad overview and really help. The last part of it is you need to know that the acquisition cost to take on a customer. People don't know that. You ever ask a business owner and they have no idea what that costs. And then they have to know the longevity of that customer, because different customers are different. If you're doing roofs, you're just doing it one time. So if it costs you $212 to land a lead on a $10,000 job, you know your customer acquisition cost is $212. But for me, for gutters, maybe my customer acquisition cost is $140, but I might do that person on an average 6.5 times. So then I'm going to say, okay, the average customer I get for 6.5 years or whatever it is. That then you can really know how much money you can spend on marketing.
Yeah, agreed.
Got to know that, because it's very different if you're transactional or if you have customers for years. But the way you figure that out is you look at all your customers, what's the average price ticket, and how many times do you do the average customer? Again, it's just numbers. This is not algebra, some calculus. This is addition and subtraction and some multiplication.
Here's the takeaway. If you got a CRM system like QuickBooks, pull your profit and loss statement and see where your money's going on the expenses. If you don't have that yet, look into getting that. But in the meantime, pull your bank statement or your credit card statement and look at where your expenses are going. And then all you got to do is take your gross revenue, and you're going to take your expense So let's say you see that you spent $100 in fuel and you made $1,000 that week. You're going to divide that $1,000 into the 100, and that's going to give you your percentage. It'll say 0.10. So that's 10%. This is how you do the math. Divide the big number into the small number, and that'll give you your percentage. Move the decimal point 2 places to the right.
Chris, what's the good news on as you grow your business, why you should grow your business, on when you have fixed costs that don't really grow? Or say you have a truck and it's only working 3 days a week. You're already paying for it. So by adding more work, that cost doesn't go up.
That's it, man.
The margin, the profit margins go up. That's why companies that do $5 million generally make much higher profit margins than companies that do $500,000. I mean, it's a no-brainer. Every time I go up, $100,000 in my business, my margins get slightly better profit margins. That keeps me so motivated. I knew it when I was doing $1 million. I was like, man, what's this going to look like at 4 million? This is going to be crazy.
Yep.
And it happens.
All right, Blue Collar Millionaires, we will catch you next Monday morning early for the next episode. Make sure you tune in because it's going to be a gold mine.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.